Okay, well, welcome everyone. I'm looking forward to sharing with you about responding to critical incidents in the workplace and to provide you some insights and tools to reduce the fear and anxiety about what to do if and when you are faced with calling a debrief for your staff should a traumatic incident happen within your workplace. It's already been, oh, there we go. Sorry, I'm still working through some of the tech stuff here. And so, you know, my background in critical debriefing includes working with police departments, victims of crime, school districts, addiction and mental health since 2006. And I've attended and supported groups in debriefing after many different forms of incidences of such as armed robbery, sudden death in the community or workplace, homicide, suicide, domestic violence situations. In my work with the Health Authority as a therapist with mental health and addictions, I engaged in debriefing with school systems, supporting children, youth, and families and community. And I've also attended and supported communities that were impacted by flooding in our region, supporting individuals and families who had lost everything. Mm-hmm. My practice really is focused on workplace well-being toward creating a strong and healthy workplace. And I've also provided external consultations in the areas of supervision and psychoeducational supports. There again toward employee workplace wellness. So my hope today is to provide you with some thoughtful tools and understanding of what you and your organization may experience when a traumatic incident occurs. And these tools will support you in your response to a traumatic incident. And today we're going to explore the following areas and have some interactive discussion in groups. And those have already been set up for when we're ready to break out. So our agenda is to discuss or to share what a traumatic event is, what is a critical debrief, the phases of a CTRI so that you have deeper understanding, and when you're explaining to staff perhaps what that is, how to recognize signs and symptoms, so trauma reactions and responses, factors to consider is in leadership management when calling a debrief, and understanding personal triggers and personal responses. And some skills that we will look at is communication, listening, emotional intelligence. We're going to do a little case scenario, and then look at support and resources that can help guide you in moving forward. So a traumatic event is it can be natural, disaster, earthquake, hurricane, tornado, fire. I know your region last year had significant flooding. And it can also be caused by other disturbing circumstances. So a personal attack, witnessing violence or sexual assault, a motor vehicle accident, suicide, homicide, sudden death or loss of a client or colleague, a partner, home invasion, workplace robbery. The list can be quite extensive. So it can be a large scale or a smaller scale event. And crisis is simply stated as a heightened emotional arousal, emotional turmoil, and it's an acute emotional reaction to some powerful stimulus or demand. Whereas trauma is lasting emotional response that often results from living through a distressing event. Experiencing a traumatic event can impact a person's sense of safety, sense of self, and ability to regulate emotions and navigate relationships. So traumatic events can be difficult to define because the same event may be more traumatic for some than it may be for other people. And then we have stages of crisis. So we all have a window of tolerance And then a person can become hyper-aroused during a crisis or traumatic event, either by shutting down or unable to regulate or calm emotions. And some characteristics would include disruption to the person's psychological balance. Usual coping mechanisms may fail, and distress or impairment. So we have the pre-crisis, the crisis, and then there's post-crisis, which is recovery. And we all have personal responses to trauma or crisis, and it's important to know what your personal response is, and your response to observing others in the impact. So I'm sure you've heard of the fight, flight, freeze response, and it's also known as an acute stress response. And the fight or flight response, is a psychological reaction that occurs when we are in the presence of something that is mentally or physically terrifying. There's a physical reaction with a fight or flight response, and that is triggered. And there's a sudden release of hormones that prepares your body to either to fight or flight in that response. In our sympathetic nervous system, adrenal gland is activated during that stage. And the reaction, can cause an increase in the heart rate, blood pressure, and breathing rate. And once the threat is gone, it could take 20 to 60 minutes, sometimes longer, for your body to return to a normal, to the pre-arousal state. And it's important for you to understand the differences within your workplace to guide the direction if you're using your EAP provider or within your debrief. And I'm going to break these out further for you as we move through the presentation. But there are different types of stress and stress responses: secondary and vicarious trauma, post-traumatic stress, compassion fatigue, grief and loss, and complicated grief. And of course, I feel I'd be remiss. Obviously, COVID has had a significant impact on frontline, and the pandemic has had a huge impact on individuals, families, workers, society, and would be considered a large-scale event. There's still studies in the process to understand the impact to employees, and they're beginning to see the value of having debriefing even in this circumstance. And what for me stands out personally is that in care facilities, with the quarantining, especially in care home facilities, the impact on workers and families, medical professionals who are unable to see their families and having multiple losses. So the research indicates that mental health and well-being has dropped 33%, 45% experienced burnout, 50% felt less connected to colleagues, and more workers experience anxiety, depression, chronic stress due to traumas of the pandemic. So before we get into the critical debrief, what a critical debrief is and why it would be helpful, I thought it would be good to gain an understanding of how many of you participated or been involved in a critical debrief in your workplace. If you wouldn't mind sharing what yes or no answer would be fantastic. So it looks about 45% have participated, and 55 have not participated. So the intent and purpose of it is to decrease distress level within the work environment and to ensure staff is supported. Leaders can provide the intervention, must be trained and adhere to the standards of a critical incident stress debrief. I've also provided some additional resources for you should you decide you want to take the training. It was developed by Dr. Jeffrey Mitchell in 1974. He was a former firefighter, paramedic. Critical incident stress debriefing is highly specific, structured crisis intervention to reduce stress, traumatic stress, increase coping, and facilitate group solidarity among the people who have experienced the trauma together. The intervention involves emotional processing and psychoeducation, which was utilized by first responders. And it's used to manage an intense stress reaction and to return to their individual level of functioning when their usual coping mechanisms are overwhelmed. And it's evolved over time to now really include anyone that's been exposed to a trauma, traumatic incident, to those that are witnesses and bystanders, victims, caregivers, family members that may have been impacted. So it really looks at a full spectrum of level of impact. And often I'm asked, why is the process helpful? And I think this will help you as well in explaining to your staff. Having a chance to talk about a common experience can be helpful and acknowledge what's happened, helping to understand why reactions may occur in a certain way, feeling safe to share in a debrief. And this is where confidentiality and non-judgmental listening is very important. Providing resources and possible referral to further counseling and supports. And those have also been provided for you in your package. The meeting is not about policy or finding fault about what's happened. This is meant to be processing the event. And the goals is really to reduce tension, stabilize the person, mobilize resources, mitigate the impact of the event. An intervention typically should take place 24 to 72 hours after the incident. I would say in my experience, this does not always happen. And when it does not, if it's 3 to 4 months later, in my experience, the staff have become either quite resentful or not heard when they requested to have a debrief. It's been left too long. It's not designed to replace individual therapy. And the importance lies in providing a safe environment to explore experiences and teaching components of the debriefing process. Attendance should be voluntary, a natural group, and we'll certainly talk about that a little later as well, when we're not incorporating natural groups, so a unit or whatever terminology you might use for your organization. And this needs to be assessed and established before an intervention is in place. So there's a lot of pre-planning prior to, which we'll talk about. And I really can't highlight the importance of staff feeling safe in their sharing in their experiences when they're feeling vulnerable. And so a facilitator in this process would explain the group expectations, obviously ensure confidentiality and its limitations. Cell phones would generally be off unless you are a crisis worker and need to have it on if you have to leave, but generally they're off. There's generally there will be no recording or taking of notes in these meetings. And it's there again, setting the group norms of that we're not talking over or giving advice to others in the room. So for example, you shouldn't feel this way. This is not the time to be interacting and advising others how they should feel. And I'd like for you to consider throughout this time that we have together is what constitutes feeling safe in your environment when you're feeling vulnerable. For myself, it's about looking at the power differentials in the room, which we'll discuss further, but power differentials certainly can impact the level of trust and level of vulnerability to actually work through what's occurring. And ultimately, really, it's about normalizing the reactions to facilitate normal recovery restorative functioning, enhance unit group cohesion and performance, and identify individuals who may need additional assistance, and to refer them to other resources. And as leaders, management, whatever your role may be in the organization, you should consider the specific situation, consult on any individual involved who may have been impacted, and determine the individual level of exposure to the critical incident. So as I stated earlier, the CTRI process is a brief intervention. Facilitators will need to have a strong foundation of knowledge, so knowing about trauma responses, coping mechanisms, and respond appropriately to possibly de-escalation, crisis assessment, and strong communication skills. And as leaders, I'm hopeful. When I've been called into debriefs at times, staff had no idea what this was even about or why I was even there. So I really could not stress stronger that by you learning what you're learning today, that you'll share with your staff what a debrief is and what the benefits are, and how it looks for them when they're processing. So in a critical debrief, an introduction will cover what is a critical debrief, the process involved, how it's helpful for those experiencing the incident. Guidelines and expectations of the session are laid out. There again, confidentiality, and there's times that may have to be broken if someone is harmed to themselves or others, and informed consent. Identifying any safety or security issues, and expectations of those of the participants in the process. The next phase is exploration of thoughts, feelings, and emotions, reactions and experiences, interpretation and meaning of the event, remembering and coping. And it's looking at the cognitive and the physical, emotional, and behavioral symptoms that are common to human reaction responses to a traumatic event. And then as part of the debrief, it's about teaching the normal symptoms of grief and trauma and coping and stress and management skills. There are individuals who may need more help, and how to identify their response to become more grounded. Teaching also consists of assessing cognitive, again, physical, emotional, behavioral symptoms, and educating on the different stresses, burnout, compassion, fatigue, that may occur or be co-occurring with the incident. And then typically there's a follow-up composure where there's a summary and review of what's been discussed and learned, and referrals are provided. Depending on your EAP, Employee Assistance Program, should you have one, they can offer individual work as well with people. So really, this is just for you to remember, change after trauma are normal, and there's a normal range of emotions during and after an event. Everyone experiences and responds differently to grief and trauma. And some individuals may have some of these reactions more than others, and some may not have any reactions at all. So it may be, it could also be based on past trauma experiences and their ability to cope. And I'd like for you to explore in the breakout groups these questions. What do the reactions look like to you after an incident? And some of this may be experienced personally as well if you've had to attend or have been involved in a traumatic incident. So I would like for you to look at the physical reactions of during and after an incident. So the person's body reactions, the emotional, so that's our feelings, so what they might feel, putting yourself in their shoes. cognitive examples of what we tell ourselves, and what would be the behavioral examples, so the actions that you might observe. Okay, so excellent job, everyone. I'm just going to add a couple more, and this is never an extensive list. You'll keep adding to it as you go through this process. Obviously, physical aches and pains. Your muscles might become tense. You might get gastrointestinal issues arise from that. Sleep and sleep deprivation absolutely can have an impact. On the emotional examples, could be resentment or feeling hopeless or helpless in the situation. Insecurity, depression, anxiety was already highlighted, and many more. In terms of the cognitive examples, like what we tell ourselves, certainly there can be a lot of ruminating, going over your thoughts and coulda, woulda, shoulda, as I call it, and which can impact your sleep. Negative self-talk, and even beliefs around burnout or expectations of what you could have done. I've often heard, like, I'm a professional and this should not be happening to me, and no one else is feeling this way, are some of the negative self-talk that can happen. And it looks like you covered all of the social behavioral, so compassion fatigue, less motivation, conflict can be more present. And it's, many people might think that their reactions to the trauma is that they're going crazy, or that they're losing it, and which can add to feelings of being more anxious. So great job, everyone. I've added the common reactions and I think we pretty much have covered all of these pieces that you've already discussed. Additional would be lack of intimacy, loss in interest in sex, losing trust in others. Worldview was highlighted, 100% can change. Lack of energy, dizzy spells, chest pain, and so forth. So additional feelings, it's not easy to acknowledge difficult feelings. In my experience, you'll see a range of emotions. Anger would not be an uncommon for people, depending on the level of trauma or the incident. That finger pointing can sometimes happen as well. Also a stigma around not showing vulnerability, not appearing weak, or showing others your emotions. Obviously guilt is, could they have done something differently? Or could others have done something differently? Blaming the system that it failed, of actions that were done or not done. And this is why I think having critical debriefs at the early stage, which they should occur, can eliminate much of this. Rumors can also start to happen about what they think happened or should have been done differently. So it can also add to an environment that could become more toxic just based on rumors. And we've already covered those. And really, the acceptance is about coming to the terms with the loss. So now we're going to explore feelings and emotions. Now that we've already explored those, we're going to go look at the types of stress, vicarious trauma, burnout. And this will help with your understanding of exposing staff to a debrief unnecessarily, and assist you in understanding the tolerance level to the worker through the traumatic event. Obviously, we have day-to-day, I'm sure you've all experienced, or even cumulative stress, but day-to-day is common to all people. It's part of our decision-making and problem solving. It motivates people to be more productive. Cumulative stress results over a prolonged, unrelieved exposure to a variety of stressors. It can be personal and environmental at the same time. and can develop into burnout over time. And critical stress is really caused by extraordinary events, which provoke a high level of stress in almost everyone involved. It's sudden and disruptive, involves actual or perceived threat, loss, causes a sense of vulnerability, and disrupts the sense of being in control and the perception that the world around you is safe and predictable. And not all professions are equally exposed to professional stresses. I would suspect in your line, you certainly would be have a higher exposure. And vicarious trauma occurs through listening to the client's stories, can cause a disruption in the worker's view of self and others and the world in general. So it's really when compassion overwhelms the helper, when they are exposed to graphic descriptions of violent or traumatic event, and experiences is similar to the change that occur in a traumatized individual. And secondary trauma is really refers more to a set of symptoms. They're quite similar, secondary and vicarious, but the person can develop some of the same symptoms, affected by the exposure to the indirect trauma, and can lead to compassion fatigue as well as burnout. Compassion fatigue is in your ability to empathize. So it's really bearing the suffering of others. In working with traumatized individuals, the person can become preoccupied with the client and re-experiencing their lived trauma. And that can appear in emotional exhaustion, sense of lacking personal accomplishment, depersonalizing the client. And when we look at burnout and vicarious trauma or vulnerability, it's really the reactions of the worker to job-related stress as well. And I wanted to share that when there is a death of a client or colleague in a workplace, workforce, it brings up a lot of questions, or other traumas as well, that you maybe had not considered before. There's inevitably a grief and loss process that occurs. Grief and loss does not have to be a death. Grief and loss can be, suffering from a significant illness, loss of independence, loss of a job, loss of friendship, loss of safety in your workplace. So these are some of the, being in the helping profession, when you are working through a traumatic event or a loss within the workplace, common questions are, how do I grieve this loss? Are my feelings normal? How do I honor this person's memory? I grieve the loss of, for example, several family members, but that was different. No one's prepared me for how to grieve the loss of a client or a colleague. You may not have a frame of reference for the experience to draw upon for yourself. And when we look at grief and loss, which is a cycle, it's powerful, multifaceted, often uncontrollable response to human beings following a personally painful or traumatic event. Grief is a natural response to painful events. It's not a single emotion. I really liken this to a roller coaster of emotions that you'll go through. Once again, we're all unique in how we experience grief and how long we will grieve. And grief can vary considerably there again from one person to another. And there's some, commonalities that can help you recognize that someone is grieving. You may be familiar with Kubler-Ross, the grief cycle. And I've included this and have additional resources for you at the end of the presentation. And grief and loss trauma is not a linear process. That people can have delayed grief, which involves having postponed a normal grief response to later in a period of time, whether it's intentional or unconscious. Disenfranchised grief is where occurs when the person cannot openly acknowledge the loss of a death because of real or imagined pressure exerted either, say, by family or friends, or cultural or religious beliefs. Traumatic grief can obviously occur when a death occurs violently or unexpectedly. So I always, these stages throughout here, anger, denial, bargaining, acceptance, depression, people can flit between all of these in a short period of time. Sometimes people might get stuck in certain in part of the cycle. I just put a little quote here for you. Healing from trauma can also mean strength and joy. The goal of healing is not papering over of changes in an effort to preserve or present things as normal. It's to acknowledge and wear your new life, warts, wisdom, and all with courage. So what can you do for yourself, for coworkers, caregivers, residents, and or clients to increase resiliency? And you might already be doing several things within your organization already. So considerations for leadership is to consult on the individual who may have been impacted and level of exposure to the critical incident. Assessing the critical incident is where the team lead or management considers the specific situation, pulls your team together, and reviews your policies and procedures on responding. If you don't have any policies or procedures, that might be something you should be advocating for so that you will all feel prepared for when and if that event happens. Consult any individual who may have been impacted and determine the level of exposure that the individual may have had to the critical incident. So did they know the person? Did they witness it? Or were they just on the periphery, way outside of the scope of the incident, or had no connection to the individual? Would be perhaps someone you may not bring in at that time, because as we talked about, vicarious trauma, secondary trauma can cause impact to those individuals. And power differentials in the room may cause workers to shut down and not share their experience. And they may lash out perhaps at leaders during their trauma response. And I'd like for you to think about in your own work environment how you would feel if you had a supervisor or manager in a debrief. Would it create a level of safety? Would it not? Do you have to watch what you say in those circumstances? Also, looking at internal facilitator versus an external facilitator. If it's an external through your EAP, they're trained to facilitate. This might not be a concern, but if it's someone who's internal to the organization, are they equipped to address the emotions? What is their background? Do they have any psychology or therapeutic background? And are they trauma informed? Does it also put them in a position of power if sensitive information does come out in a debrief? And who should facilitate the debrief? We've already talked about. Group size. You don't want to have groups that are, if you're a large organization generally it would be, 10 to 20 individuals in a group, if that many. It can even be 2 to 3 people. Length of time that's provided generally is 1 to 3 hours. And some organizations allow you to pop in and do check-ins with individuals within the office. And as we went through the changes psychologically, emotionally, here are some examples of some changes that you might see within work. Leaders and managers are often the first point of contact in responding to a crisis situation, and including the issues that might arise for traumatized individuals. It's important that the managers understand the impact and should acknowledge, to provide appropriate support and make that available to employees. And that will be essential for their treatment and recovery and overall well-being if these areas are addressed. So changes in the work are not uncommon after a traumatic incident, and you might observe reduced work performance due to temporary memory or concentration difficulties, an initial change in atmosphere or mood within the environment or the culture, anger or irritability, leading to possible arguments or conflict in the work environment. You might observe, individuals being tearful or nervous or anxious or insecure. You might observe individuals avoiding certain areas or tasks. They might also request time off for a medical leave if they've been significantly impacted. And really, it's about looking at the amount of time. So it becomes a prolonged period of more than 4 to 6 weeks. Could be an indicator that the employee is needing of more resources. So how you can engage and support is to clearly acknowledge that this isn't an atypical event has taken place, that's going to take time, and support will likely be required. This will help the employee to deal with the situation and hopefully return to a normal practice. Showing empathy and understanding to those affected. So that's really about listening without judgment, avoid making assumptions. With empathy and understanding, it's simply even just asking, like, how are things going for you at the moment? What would be helpful for you right now? And what would help for you to feel safer or more calm in the situation. Providing options for employees, for example, enabling them to take a break, or some people prefer to just work through in those areas. So maintaining as much as possible routine and structure, allowing those, giving them allowances for those impacted, and there again identifying support options, which we've provided several for you. I can't stress enough how, that you should have a plan in place. So initiating a plan with clear steps to address urgent issues, and having a procedure that would include defining the roles, action plans, and communication processes. You may want to train relevant staff who can also provide feedback and review, which comes also with a caveat in terms of safety for some of for staff. Oh, sorry about that. And seeking advice and support. So you might look at occupational health and safety, WCB, your human resources. If you have an EAP provider, to reach out to them would also be helpful. You're not in it alone, so it's really important to have a team in place. And so, since we've explored the physical and psychological impact of a traumatic event, these incidents take time to comprehend. and adjust to and recover from. Positive steps that can help be helpful to employees include, focusing on what is positive. Consider how you can learn from the experience. Engage in, a healthy diet or exercise, and try to maintain as many interests as possible. Will help with resilience. Try to, there again, maintain as much routine and stay connected to your supports. Keeping communication channels, with your family, your friends. It could be pastoral as well, or spiritual, and colleagues. Keeping that communication door open. This is a time that you want to avoid making major decisions and to give yourself a break. Some people may blame themselves or feel guilt or shame. And they have those messages again, like I shared, that they should be stronger. They need to pull themselves together. This is a time to be kind to yourself and not hard on what could have, would have, or should have been. I encourage staff to talk to their manager and colleagues about ways to bring employees together to establish stronger connection. So this could be looking at team building, holding an event to mark what's happened, a fundraiser, arranging a form of dedication to the individual that may have been lost. And so I want you to kind of, for yourself, just reflect on, what are some things that you engage in to reinforce resilience in your office and with employees within the organization? What does your organization already do that connects you as a team? And how can this be bolstered? And I'm often asked when I'm debriefing how they can support a coworker through this time, as often many colleagues will feel helpless during that period. And this can include leadership supporting one another through this time too. So really it's about being an active listener. It means not giving advice or bringing in your personal comparisons to your own experiences. It's really about simply listening and being a warm presence. So it's acknowledging the event. Don't pretend it didn't happen. Be an active, attentive listener. Long-term support. Offer practical support. Be observant. And there to continue to additional supports through other resources that have been provided. An acknowledgement of letting your coworker set the pace for this type of experience. Practical support can be simply, offering to go for lunch, or would they like a ride home, rather than just saying, what can I do to help, or let me know how I can help. Often when people are overwhelmed, they are quite stumped on what they need in the moment when they're in crisis. And you're always being observant of one another and ensuring that their health and wellness is okay. And so you might observe prolonged emotional stress, as we talked about earlier in the training here today. And supporting a coworker and taking care of yourself after a traumatic event is much the same for leadership, and you too are also impacted and may experience vicariously through caring for others in the workplace as leaders. So I highlighted understand, keep a routine, take time to resolve daily conflicts, find ways to relax, turn to people, participate in leisure activities or recreation, try to keep that routine or what you would normally do. Recognize that you cannot control everything, and recognize when you may or others may need trained help to assist going through what is happening. And also knowing where you need to go for immediate help. So if you're observing that yourself or others not taking care of themselves, and observe a strong reaction, that continues for a prolonged period of time, and not decreasing but increasing, would be a sign of that they might need additional help. And workplace culture plays a huge role, depending on how the organization chooses to respond or not respond to a debrief. And it can impact recovery of the workforce to return to work or to want to even be present. And there's a number of elements of an organization work culture that can contribute, starting with preparedness. So companies that avoid, which avoid long delays, having a process in place with clear guidelines, making prompt assessments of the situation and to react immediately to the needs of the organization will help towards recovery for the staff. Flexibility to, this enhances resiliency to the trauma and allows, present and future demands to be met. So that will fostering flexibility will be helpful. Communication, the constant and speedy flow of information is one of the most important factors in managing a traumatic event. So that's keeping people connected, informed, and providing relevant information will help individuals cope and promotes a sense of stability and control. I'm sure you can all maybe have experienced when there's no communication or lack of communication can cause a lot of frustration and does not create safety. Diversity in a workforce of respect, acceptance, and understanding the different reactions that may occur, and having being able to learn and share a variety of ways of responding to and dealing with a crisis. Openness to work with external supports. Some organizations I've worked with were quite closed and did not want outside resources to come in, which actually does impact the workforce because they were, in my opinion, not equipped to address the significant emotional pieces that come along with a traumatic event. Expressing empathy, having a genuine understanding and interest in the experience and welfare of others. Engaging in, and it shows that the company is genuinely committed to the welfare of its employees through acknowledgement of the situation. Ongoing health and well-being needs are looked at and addressed, and it shows investment to the people that are employed, and in turn it helps with the recovery process. Okay, I'm going to show you a quick, I feel like I've been talking a lot here. I'm going to attempt to show you a clip with Renee Brown, Empathy versus Sympathy.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, "I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me." Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Any thoughts, or anyone seen this video before?
It is a reminder, because sometimes we do the sympathetic thing and we're just not investing to the extent that we should. And it's personally, it's at work, it's on different levels. So it is a reminder that you can't silver line it. It's just really not helping somebody.
Yeah, 100%. And those things are actually quite hurtful when they're shared in that manner. And yes, I've seen it happen, and it's not always
One of the people I work with is fighting breast cancer right now. And before she got into, now you need chemo, now you need radiation, and she'd had the double mastectomy, she said, "I am so sick and tired of hearing everybody's cancer story."
Yeah. Yes.
It's not helping me deal with how I'm feeling. It's just helping other people feel somehow connected to what I'm going through, but it's not helping me. And I was thinking, oh, geez, that might be fair to say I can share about somebody else who's got it worse right now, but
yes.
No, she didn't want to hear that. So I think of her a lot when I'm thinking about how I'm going to connect with somebody who's going through something.
Yes. Well, and I think it's important, especially in the line of work that your group is in, right? And working with, vulnerable populations and what you see every day. So, really about, and I'm not sure if any of you have provided some resources on emotional intelligence too. I think we can always freshen up, certainly in certain areas, especially when we might be having compassion fatigue, or just listening to people's stories in a high-paced environment. It's really around that personal insight and how we communicate in a crisis. What is nonverbal language saying? So what is your posture, your eye contact, facial expressions, gestures? Can you be an aggressive individual, dismissive, disinterested, eye rolling? I'm sure you may have seen these things sometimes in meetings. Turning your back on someone. It's about paying attention to your tone and pitch. Are you a loud talker? Or when you become escalated, do you speak loudly or do you speak softly? Are you calm? Are you elevated? Condescending? And also looking at your physical proximity and space. Are you a close talker, or need to be close to people? In crisis, that may not be a good fit for many. Is your body language open or closed? So if you look at the individual here, that would be considered closed body language. So really in a crisis, about being present to those who've experienced the trauma, and you want to have an open posture to be calm and to have a welcoming tone. We don't want to escalate the person. And I'm sure you would find this with clients as well. When they're amped up or escalated, you wouldn't amp up with them, because that would continue the escalation. The biggest tool of all is listening, being an active listener. Your physical presence, is really of utmost helpfulness to people. So when you're listening, don't worry so much about what you will say. Just concentrate on listening to the words that are being shared with you. What is the biggest barrier to listening? If you are finding that you're struggling, there could be distraction. It might be hard to hear what the person is saying. It's about looking at the verbal again, nonverbal language, because our body language can carry a great deal of meaning. And so when we sense that someone is feeling a certain way, we want to consider some of the different factors that might be contributing to the emotion. Having compassion to try and learn and understand. Don't instruct or set expectations. Just simply be there. Being a reliable presence is most important gift that you can give. And while you can't take the pain away, nor should you try, this is about just being present. So really about empathize, validate, have compassion will help you and the individual through this process. So, and perhaps some of you have taken some courses or they do lots of different tests you can do on your own emotional intelligence online. But really it's about, it's there to assist you in building your emotional intelligence, person's ability to recognize, understand, and manage, and reason with emotion. It's a critical ability to enhance your interpersonal communication. Really imagine a world in which you could not understand when a friend was feeling sad or when a coworker was angry. It's really about that interpretation and gaining that insight. The ability to also involves using the emotional understanding to make decisions, to solve problems, and to communicate with others. Reflection is another key piece of emotional intelligence, and that's the ability to reason with emotions and consider how your own emotions influence your decisions and behaviors. When you're thinking about how other people respond, assess the role that their emotions may play, because you are going to see a gamut of emotions when a traumatic incident occurs. And as part of the components of emotional intelligence, it's about perceiving emotions, reasoning with emotions, understanding emotions. So, for example, if your boss is acting angry, it might mean that they are dissatisfied with your work, or it could be because they got a speeding ticket coming into work today, or that they, were having an argument with their partner before coming in. And emotionally intelligent people think before reacting. When it's a highly charged emotional event, become angry with a coworker. Really, it's about taking that time to calm yourself and have a rational discussion at a later time when it is better suited, when there's no emotion involved in it. And I've just provided some possible tools that could be helpful for you to practice your emotional intelligence. Not to be judgmental of others, having empathy, being able to solve problems in a way that works for everyone. I understand that can't always happen in a work environment, depending on what needs to occur. Great listening skills, being able to share your feelings with others. Just because you might be in a management or leadership role, you're not immune to trauma or the emotions of that. So it's important for you to also reach out. And understanding and knowing your own personal triggers is important when responding to it and assisting in a trauma. So I would maybe take a snapshot of this one for you to reflect upon. Is how do you personally respond to strong emotions? Are you a fight, flight, or freeze? Do you get agitated if someone is challenging? And consider your personal triggers. So if you experience a personal loss, if you're uncomfortable with people having strong emotions, it's about really digging deep and understanding what your triggers are. So internal triggers come from within the person. It could be a memory, a physical sensation, or an emotion. So for example, if you're exercising and your heart starts pounding, and the sensation might remind you of perhaps running away from, it could be possibly an abusive partner or running away from conflict. Other internal triggers, that's when your anxiety, if you're feeling anxious or angry, there's a trigger that's happening, and it's about identifying what that might be for yourself. Is it that you're feeling out of control? And then your response and reaction is to respond a certain way. And external triggers come from outside of the environment. So that can be a person, a place, or a specific situation. So what might be a normal everyday situation, minor inconvenience for some, might be triggering for someone else. So some examples of living, there's someone that might have a trauma response is feeling triggered by a movie, a television show, a news article that reminds them of the experience. It could be arguing with a friend or spouse or partner. Certain sounds might remind you of the experience, or smells. So I would, with flooding or, fires and so forth, that might trigger a response along with that. And here is a list for you also to consider, reflect upon when planning to do a debrief with employees after a traumatic incident. This is a list that I've derived, and I've seen the pitfalls when this happens. And we can certainly add to that, and I'm hopeful that for those of you that have participated, might share some at the end here. So some of the pitfalls is having those who are not part of the traumatic event or on the outside significantly bringing them in for a debrief, because this can cause harm and vicarious trauma from hearing stories of what's occurred if they were not directly impacted. So in some circumstances, you might break that out. You do your inner circle of the most impacted, and then look at the collateral pieces afterward. Making a meeting mandatory certainly can be a pitfall, can cause resentment. This is your staff's and all employees' ability to have self-determination in this process. Some people just do not like groups and do not want to share and do not want to participate. They may very well be more open to a one-on-one or seek their own help outside of the organization. Not having a plan in place can certainly be detrimental and will cause you as managers, or if you're bringing someone in to facilitate, will certainly cause chaos, and you're just going to be reacting to the situation. I think managers and supervisors attending with workers to debrief can be a pitfall, even though you might think you're the best supervisor and the best manager and you're besties with everyone in the office. However, there is a power differential in this dynamic. And oftentimes we may not know what will come out in a debrief. And that creates a lot of vulnerability for the individuals who are debriefing, and might, they may say something, they may identify mental health concerns, that now it will just put you in a not a good position. Having an inside facilitator versus an outside facilitator also can pose that power differential again, and it because they are exposed to personal information, they may come in with a bias if it's an internal staff. And what is their level of qualification to be providing that? Others I have seen is delivering the news via email. So larger corporations just shoot an email out. And so it's really about, as an organization, thinking how should people be made aware when an incident has happened. It's a more personal meeting with individuals in each unit to have that conversation and share the facts or what you are able to share. There's some information that you just may not be able to share. For example, a suicide within a workplace or outside, there might not be a lot of details provided, and then it will, so there'll be some FOIP issues regarding that, and your HR will guide on that. But I think the more personable that this process can be, than sending an email, or just arriving to work and seeing an email can be quite shocking. Some organizations decide how they're going to. So, for example, one facility, when one of their participants passed away, that they'd always have a light on at the front, and then workers knew when they came in that someone had passed, and then they would go talk to their supervisor. So this can look a lot of different ways. Okay, so I've done a lot of talking again. Now we're going to go through that. We've gone through the traumatic incident, the do's and don'ts, what to consider, the emotional, psychological impact. I'm going to break you now out into groups again, probably do the same groups, and would like for you to come up with a plan on what you would do as a team in this scenario presented. And then we'll come back and have a chat about it. Okay, well, do we want to have a spokesperson from each group share sort of what you came up with? Or I guess I didn't say a spokesperson, or do I have anyone that wants to share how they would move through this scenario, what they would consider?
I'll happily go.
Excellent.
So we were in group 5, and we did want to address power differential. We didn't feel that managers and supervisors should be present so that staff can have truly candid, honest opportunity. Regardless of how great your relationship might be, it just would probably hinder their open honesty. Smaller intimate groups was a good suggestion. Holding space to allow for drop-in. It doesn't, making it optional to participate or not, or providing access to participating in your own way. So maybe leaving business cards or flyers, maybe you want to call it a different time. Having enough sessions that it meets and acknowledges all your shift worker schedules. Providing sufficient coverage so people can participate. So it's not just sort of an act, rather it's setting intentions to ensure that you're meeting everyone's needs. And setting intentions with how you want to talk about this type of thing, common language, how do you feel about this? Share stories was another great suggestion. Maybe this person would have wanted to be more memorialized rather than it focusing on the loss. That is not to negate that you need to discuss that, of course, when people share how they feel, but that you might want to share stories about the individual if that's what people's comfort level is. We also thought using an outside consultant would be of benefit depending on the size of your organization, or looking at who's directly impacted and who's more collaterally affected, and holding space for those different groups.
All wonderful points. And it is really, I think smaller is better. Even if you're a large organization, throwing everyone in together is not really conducive to that level of trust. I mean, as you know, within your own units, or that's already established for the most part. So great job for bringing those pieces forward. Excellent. Anyone else?
I'll go. The timeliness of management acknowledgement of what has happened is pretty crucial, especially since the scenario happened in the community. So some of them might already know before management would have known, or that it was brought back to, in this case, facility. And that makes me think about, we're in home care, so we are individuals going into spaces. So it's, for us, it would be, not like you can say, come to the lunchroom. There's those considerations, and that makes me think, wow, we have some work to do on how we would actually congregate. But holding space was definitely one of the top things, and recognizing the reactions of the different divisions or units, and the coworkers in their proximity and relationship to that person. Some of them might need to be off, like, immediately. Some of them might, not be able to function for the rest of the day, and recognizing that, and also recognizing that if they had been on the team for that long, that while the power differential is there, that the managers are going to be dealing with that same kind of grief and feeling that same loss, because they might have had really close relationships as well with that person. So excluding them, not excluding, but separating them might not necessarily always be the best idea, and considering that as well. But maybe just having, I don't know what you'd say, tiers, like different levels of, or different.
Well, and
groups,
usually I'll just interrupt. So usually what happens is that supervisors or management would have their own debrief to work through separately. So the staff have theirs, might be supervisors have their own, management has their own, or sometimes they'll combine management supervisors together. So they absolutely have to have their own separate, because they might have other things that come up separate from
100%.
Right?
100%.
Yeah, and also that, and being able to be vulnerable. I don't know what the hell to do here, or we need to think of these logistics, because there's just so many things that are all moving at one time.
Well, and I'm a solopreneur, so those things are in my mind. Like it impacts all of us, and I get that. Like, who do you? I think the workers want to see some leadership for sure, and some guidance, and some empathy, an empathetic message for all of them in their situation. And then when you're a solopreneur, you just step back and, like, you know what I mean? Like, that's where it gets tricky, right?
Yeah, well, and especially when you have, night shift, different shifts throughout the day, and trying to coordinate
100%.
those. And I know in my own practice is that I will work on weekends or evenings, whatever, to adjust for their shift work.
Yeah.
So I would hope that your EAPs or providers out there have that flexibility to support, especially shift work is the most challenging, and they should be supported. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a lot of the same thing, and that social media might be involved, it might already be out there, and you might be getting messages before you even have learned of that yourself.
Or people putting on media that so-and-so's passed, and it's, and so that there might even have to be policy development around an organization of how you're going to address those things. But I think the first part is to acknowledge where are your gaps, what could be better. When staff are, in some instances, management never called a debrief, but staff requested a debrief, and it never happened, which really upset the staff. So by the time I got there, they were already quite elevated and angry. So I was no longer just working on the grief and trauma. Now I'm dealing with anger,
escalation,
and I don't go into that. I actually shut that down, because that's not my role.
Right.
I always encourage to go back to your employer or to your manager and address those concerns with them.
Yeah, that's why our top one was the timeliness of addressing it as well, right? Kind of to try to be at the initial stage of that rather than, proactive rather than reactive to
100%. And if your staff are requesting it and know that they have a right to request it, I think it's really important so that they at least feel empowered as well.
Mm-hmm.
In a situation where you feel no empowerment. So
totally out of control. Yeah. Thank you.
Did I have anyone else that wanted to share?
I can maybe just try to say some of the things that we've said in our group that maybe haven't been said. So many good things have already been said. But they really suggested that asking the employees what they would like as a support. So instead of just having an idea of what you wanted to provide, and also just with, actually, I want to point out that we spent a lot of time talking about the manager's role and how much involvement and how much of the dynamic shift or influence we should consider. If managers don't partake or are involved, then maybe the reflex is they don't care. And so there's a lot of conversation about that, and maybe a little bit of confusion or frustration or not really knowing the thresholds of that. Mm-hmm. So I think that was an important topic, but then also just for the managers to always keep an open door and to consider what could be done in the next, should another traumatic or when another traumatic event occurs.
Yes. And every structure, every organizational culture is different, right? And it's really about opening that door to management and so forth. It's easy to point the finger after the fact, but whenever any incident or something happens in a workplace, it's about going back and saying, okay, what could we have done? What could we have done differently? What can we do better? And learn from those pieces to move forward. So it will really depend on the culture of the organization and leadership structure. And really that's why I'm presenting to leadership and people today, is to so that they are aware that this, is an option that probably should occur more often than not. So thank you. Okay. Excellent discussion, and really it's going to be about the policies in place, or a plan in place. There's nothing worse than going into something and you have nothing to fall back on. Your brain is going to be racing possibly, and you're not going to be 100% in terms of, everyone will deal with trauma differently as we've explored. So it'll be really just based on having at least an outline or procedure and policy, including your HR, include OH&S if it's a workplace injury or incident, include your WCB. They provide training as well, and debriefing, your EAP, or that you might have private practitioners in the community doing that as well. Okay, so I'm going to bounce here to the next. And really, I just want to say thank you. You've done a great job on applying what we learned today. This is such a brief presentation. I obviously go on for days about this. And so I want to share just some empathetic traumatic grief responses for you when you're feeling stuck, uncomfortable, when you're providing support to employees. So here are some examples of, and you've already shared many of these already, the worst, the best things that you can say. I'm sorry for your loss. I don't know, how you feel, but I'm here to help, based on your role in the organization. My favorite memory of the person. I think people are fearful to talk about memories or positive moments, but it is important because it helps people to remember the positive aspects of the individual. And to share stories. We all need help at times like this. So how can I help? And you might very well be a first point of contact for resources. Some organizations will have a little website when you need help and have resources already listed. Sometimes, honestly, saying nothing and just being there, being, a warm body next to the person is all that is needed. We highlighted some of these already, what not to say. At least they lived a long life. Many people die young. they're in a better place. They brought this on themselves, and this would be more speaking around suicide or drug addiction or overdose. There's a reason for everything. She was a good person, but God wants her to be with him. So these are just some examples of things that are said that are really not helpful. And obviously the best traits would be to be supportive. You're not there to fix it, and don't try to fix it. It's about, feelings, being a warm presence, not telling a person what to do, not asking someone to change or to change their feelings. And grief, trauma, and loss is not time limited. The worst thing is when you try to rationalize or explain the loss, minimize it, put a timeline on it, try to fix and be directive in nature will not be helpful in those scenarios. So we're coming to the conclusion here. I wanted to share with WorkSafe BC, Safe Care BC, we provided a supplementary resource as part of the package here today. EAP services, trauma services, a help guide, as well as MRT. This one was not included, but you might want to make note of it. And this is a mobile response team in your area for psychological support, where they provide crisis intervention, consultation, well-being check-ins, workshops, wellness activities, individual and group therapy. I have provided here some additional resources. Dr. Alan Wolfelt provides a lot of information on grief and loss and transition in life. Very helpful, especially in your field, knowing mourners' rights. And it covers a massive amount of grief and loss information. Canadian Mental Health Association covers a lot of information on trauma and grief and loss. Choosing Therapy provides mental health and treatment options. And then here's some training and courses and webinars that you could look at. So the CTRI Institute has a lot of free webinars. The Achieve Center has free webinars, and Info Trauma.org also provides a lot of resources. I've also provided some books that if you have time to read, or sometimes you can YouTube some of these, if you want to look into a specific area, find some YouTubes. Of course, I like Renee Brown in terms of vulnerability and daring to lead, strategic leadership, emotional intelligence, Daniel Goleman, and another book by Dr. Neufeld. And here is me, just offer a lot of additional groups, critical incident debriefing, crisis intervention, grief and loss. I do presentations on vicarious trauma and burnout in the workplace. I do a 3-part series in grief and loss when there's a death in the workplace, and how staff can work through that. And bullying and harassment. I'm partnered with Linda Crockett, and so as part of the Canadian Institute of Workplace Harassment and Bullying, so we provide a lot of full day, half day programs on many different topics there. Communication, conflict resolution, the list goes on. So anyway, I just wanted to share that and say thank you so much for participating today.